Good evening, everyone. My name is Matthew Ogden. Today is Friday, August 2nd, 2013, and you're joining us for a live international webcast on LaRouchePAC.com. Tonight, as we are always, we are joined by Mr. Lyndon LaRouche. This is a regular series of broadcasts that occurs at 8 p.m. Eastern every Friday night. I'm also joined by Leandra Bernstein tonight, who will be joining me to pose some questions to Mr. LaRouche. And joining us in the studio are several members of the LaRouchePAC Policy Committee team who will be participating in this broadcast as well. So in order to kick off the proceedings tonight, I would like to ask Leandra to come to the podium to pose the first question.
All right, so here we are. It has been 3 weeks since the Policy Committee came into Washington, D.C., and we have a very much transformed situation on the ground in Washington, D.C., where unfortunately the Congress did decide to recess today, but the situation is very, very different, very much changed on the issue of Glass-Steagall. And I'd like to inform our viewers that on Tuesday of this week, you posed a challenge to members of the Policy Committee and your associates, saying that what was truly intended with Glass-Steagall was not being understood by your associates, by our leadership in federal office. And so you put the challenge to us, which is a nice way of saying it. You put it harshly, to show, first of all, how Wall Street will be destroyed. And we had the statement of intent by all 6 members of the Policy Committee stating the intention and how we're going to destroy Wall Street. And then the 6 steps by which we're going to dismantle Wall Street, which is available on the front page of the website. Now, what we have not yet discussed is the next phase. What is the next phase of Glass-Steagall? What is truly intended by Glass-Steagall? So, question came in from a regional building trades council leader in the Mid-Atlantic area, and I'd like you to address his question. He says, Mr. LaRouche, I am extremely upset about the rapidly diminishing economic and political strength of the labor movement in this country. With the collapse of the economy and the alarming weakness of the unions, the quality and quantity of full-time productive family-sustaining jobs are rapidly disappearing. The latest disgusting trend towards part-time workers as a means of avoiding paying for workers' health care represents another body blow to the standard of living and general health of the American worker and his or her family. What we're seeing in Detroit is that Wall Street is looting the health care, pensions, and other benefits that unionized workers negotiated in a prior period of greater economic and political strength. I wish I could say that it is primarily the Republican Party that has been in bed with Wall Street in this looting process, but it's not true. The Democrats are equally guilty. I'm disappointed and angry about the silence of our national union leadership. This kind of collapse could not have happened without their complicity. My question is one: what can we do to restore the health of the union movement as an engine for development in restoring a large-scale infrastructure economic development orientation across the nation? And 2, what, in addition to the reenactment of Glass-Steagall, can we do to put a halt to the looting of pensions and health care programs?
Well, the dealing with the pension problem is actually fairly straightforward. Those bums should be punished. Exactly that. Because this is not our policy. The problem here is the fact that for many years and many particular presidents and incumbencies and so forth, that the arguments that have been placed in designing policy have been based on certain European standards which are not intrinsically American standards. That's the first problem. The European standard is simply what you're seeing in the United States today. And this is not our policy, this is not the intention of our Constitution. Our Constitution was based in terms of economic and social policy on what was done by Alexander Hamilton. And Alexander Hamilton had nothing to do with what most people think are politics or economy. Nothing at all. Because our system is not a European system. But unfortunately, Europe has invaded the United States through our institutions, largely through British banking institutions, which have taken over the control of the Congress of the United States. Today we function on the basis of really a British system, or British-style system, or a European-style system, which is not the American system. The American system was the assumption that how do we organize a currency rather than a European currency. European currency is gold and silver, chiefly. You take a pile of gold and silver, and that's your wealth. Now you go around and you park this wealth in order to attract suckers to meet the conditions of the people who are the bankers. That's what the system is. That's what the system is now. The system in the Congress now is a fraud. It has no relationship to the purpose of the United States and our policy. Our policy is we are not slaves of gold and silver. We never depended upon gold and silver, except in dealing with foreigners. But among ourselves, we're not supposed to rely on gold and silver. We're supposed to rely upon production. And production which was defined by Alexander Hamilton as a principle, is what made the United States successful. But then, because some of our presidential leaders and so forth, their presidency, screwed things up, but good. And since that time, except with very exceptional circumstances like Roosevelt or a few other presidents, we have never had a leadership which corresponds to our concentration. And so therefore that's the key problem here. And members of Congress have, in the main, no understanding whatsoever of our Constitution. They don't care about our Constitution. They care about wheeling and dealing. They act like a European parliamentary system with American footprints or something. Huh? And so here's the problem. Now, what the problem on Glass-Steagall is people don't understand Glass-Steagall. They think they do. Even many of my own associates don't have any understanding of whatsoever what Glass-Steagall means. They give the name Glass-Steagall, but the content is missing. The content is the fact that for example, let's take the case what Alexander Hamilton used. You have one thing, you have farmers, and you have machinists and so forth. Now, the farmer will produce a crop. And at the end of that point, the farmer needs to get some payment. So therefore, that's the way. Then you have the others who produce now come in and they do something. So this transfer of what agricultural production and so-called industrial or manufacturing production went as a physical operation, not a monetary operation. All you had to do was put a price, which is your fair price estimate, on what these things represent in value. You do not deal on banking. You use banking, but banking is largely used in order to arrange the funding arrangements and payments arrangements among farmers and, say, industrial workers, machinists, and so forth. All of this is laid out very clearly by Alexander Hamilton. Now, what happened is we had some other people who came in who opposed Hamilton strongly and opposed President Washington. And as a result of this corruption, we've had only a few presidents of the United States who I would consider not skunks. I mean, some of them are not bad people, but when it comes to their politics, their policy, their outlook, their conception of policy making, they're skunks. And they're a big disappointment. They're not Americans. They're some kind of a hybrid Europeans. Now, the other side of the thing is the United States has been controlled increasingly by British banking, not only from Britain, but in New York City and in the city of Boston. These are two hot spots of corruption in the United States, because the British system, the British banking system, has controlled American banking. And that's what the Wall Street thing is today. Now, this Wall Street evil, and it is an evil, it's not an error, it's an evil. My view is cancel Wall Street. And Glass-Steagall's intention now is to eliminate Wall Street, utterly eliminate it, because it has no value as banking. It has no particular place in our constitutional system for banking. Our system was a credit system, and the idea of using of money and so forth was based on the understanding of a credit system. We have set agreements which would implicitly be satisfactory to all kinds of people and to the needs of the American people. And we had that under great presidents. Franklin Roosevelt is particularly typical of that. Others, John Kennedy was one of that persuasion and tried to be of that persuasion. And they killed him because they didn't like his policy. He wanted to destroy the United States, and when he got the United States, when they killed him, they were able to do what they were not able to do otherwise. Their intention was to send the United States to a war in Indochina. Now, that war in Indochina was a disaster. It lasted essentially for about a year. And this war ruined the United States, and we never really recovered from it. We got involved with other wars, which the British arranged. These were not in our interest. And you take the case of Douglas MacArthur, who exemplifies what our military policy is. He was not out to kill, he was out to win. And there's a difference. And to win quickly, and to win efficiently, and not to get into bloody messes. And that was his policy. And that was his policy at the time on the Indochina problem. That was exactly his policy, his advice. That's the way it should have happened. We should have never gone into Indochina. We were never going to get anything from going into Indochina. Leave it for them to solve their own problems. There's no reason why we should mess ourselves up by getting involved in this nonsense. Sometimes there are major wars, and we've had major wars. The Civil War was a major war. There have been other major wars which we had to fight. But we went to win, not to kill. Like the basic idea of the flanking operation is typical of that thing. So what we're dealing with now, you have a bunch of people, including our own associates, who do really not understand economics. They think they do because they've been reading books and having stories and being told this by advice by various people, but they have no understanding because they say, we're going to win the election. And when we win the election, that's the proposition, if we win the election, then we're going to do the following things. Well, that is nonsense. That is absolute nonsense. What you have to do is go back to the principles which are clearly understood by the founders of this nation, notably the economic policies of Alexander Hamilton. The problem is that our own people who are supporting Glass-Steagall still do not understand what Glass-Steagall means. Because Glass-Steagall means Franklin Roosevelt, and it means also Alexander Hamilton, the same thing. And the problem we've got now is we don't have an Alexander Hamilton perspective on U.S. economy. And the danger is if we don't have that Alexander the Hamilton outlook, we are incapable of assuring the support of the citizens. Because the citizen, given this kind of stuff, is simply going to react as a maybe person. Well, maybe they will do something from us. Maybe they won't. That kind of thing. Whereas if you get to the truth of the matter and actually present the Alexander Hamilton, what that means, as opposed to these monetarists and other kinds of nonsense which people foolishly believe in, that we can win. If you could present to the American people now what that means, what Alexander Hamilton's policy means. And there are a number of people among us who understand that, at least understand it superficially, maybe not with the greatest profundity, but they understand it. And if you could get the majority of, say, trade union workers, like skilled workers, and if you could mobilize them, they would readily be capable of understanding, for example, what happened to the auto industry. The auto industry is shut down. Now the people of Detroit and relating areas are being rejected to all terrible conditions. It's not necessary. We should never have shipped the auto industry overseas instead of keeping it in the United States. Now, that doesn't mean I'm opposed to the auto industry being built up inside the United States. That's not the point. If you're going to put the auto industry in large degree outside the United States, as in China and so forth, what you're going to do is you're going to take the American industry, the auto industry, and you're going to do what we did with World War II. You are suddenly going to take the machine tool design industry, and this was destroyed. We had areas of production from World War II all over the United States. The whole territories and the locations existed. They still did exist up until the shutdown of the auto industry. Now the shutdown of the auto industry inside the United States has bankrupted the basis of the U.S. economy. We no longer have productive industries. We have small shop kinds of production, but the kind of mass production combined with great skill under the leadership of the working force, this is gone. As a result, we are bankrupt. Now, as I say, I'm not going to go back into China and Japan and Korea and so forth and insist that those industries be returned to the United States. No, that's not our policy. Our policy what? Is to build up our machine tool design capabilities and related capabilities and turn them loose again. Because we have a lot of things to produce which are not just automobiles. We have a lousy national transportation system. People are driving cars where they shouldn't do it, partly because they're drunk and partly for other reasons. But in any case, what we should be doing is going to a higher level. Now, what do we have? We have not enough water to maintain the lives of our citizens because of foolishness, because of foolish policies. We have many other things. But if we build up the kind of things that are needed to maintain our food supply, which we are losing now, and if we build up a mass transportation system and a design for that which eliminates the requirement of so much automobile travel, that would be a great economic benefit. We also have to build up a new whole water system for the western part of the United States. We're now losing our food. Our food production is disappearing. Well, we could fix that. How? With high technology. What's high technology? Well, it's machine tool technology and things like machine tool technology. We should put our investment into machine tool technology. Now, if you're going to do that, now you go to the voter out there and you start talking about Glass-Steagall. It's no longer the issue that most people think. Now they've got some real action. This means we're going to get this and this and this in each part of the community of the United States. Water industries, power industries. We're going to go to high technology. The tendency now is to destroy us by a subversive bunch of enemies called greenies. The greenie actually destroys the per capita productivity of the people of the United States in two ways. One directly and one implicitly. So therefore we've come to the time that we've got to talk to the American people, the population that's now running for this election, and define an actual program comparable to the test of Alexander Hamilton and industry, high technology, power, thermonuclear power, not nuclear power, thermonuclear power and nuclear power. large-scale water systems, giant water systems to transform whole territories of the western and central United States. These are the things we must do. And when you do that, you're increasing the productivity of the American population. You're increasing the actual physical income of every part of the United States. You're increasing the productivity of the United States without increasing the burden on the working people. And that's the great change that has to happen now. And it has to happen within my own organization, which needs to have a refresher course in what economics is. Economics is what most of them think. It's not being practical. It's making a revolution in technology, to take off where the auto industry left and win.
Now, on that, we have a question which came in from Spain. This is from an auto worker who works in a General Motors plant in Spain. And he says, "Dear Mr. LaRouche, I've been following you for a number of years, but a few days ago I read your article from 2005 about the future of the auto industry in the United States if there is no radical change in policy. That article had a big impact on me, since it is the situation that the European auto sector is also currently facing. To give you an idea, the plant where I work, which has the greatest installed capacity of any General Motors plant in the world, is operating at approximately 50% capacity. The solution that the top executives have come up with is to gain in productivity, what's really low productivity, by reductions in personnel, retirements, reducing salaries, and so-called optimizing processes. I agree with you completely that these measures are bad solutions and that we have to return to high value-added physical economy. In the region where I live, in Aragon, Spain, the small middle class that remains depends totally on an industrial sector that is very localized in automobiles and which is tending to disappear. Your idea of developing higher value-added alternatives, such as the machine tool sector, seems really correct. Therefore, I would appreciate it if you would indicate to us what your proposals are for high value-added sectors, machine tools, etc., for Detroit. There are a number of us who are looking for alternatives, and your experience could be of great help to us to avoid a disaster such as that of Detroit in our region, if it is still possible to avoid it."
Well, there are two aspects to the answer, or the proper answer to that question. First of all, there's a technological answer, and that people know, but that's being cut off. There is, under the European system, under the Euro system, there is no possibility of the survival of the nation of Spain, of Portugal, of Italy, France, and Germany, for example, as with the Greek state. So you say, why is this happening? Because if you've got to find a cause, why doesn't somebody do something in the right way? And that's because the British monarchy, the Queen of England, and the Dutch, who were the same things as the Dutch Empire, same thing. What they have is a policy now. It's an explicit policy. It's a stated policy. It's publicized. There's no trouble getting the information. The Queen of England has declared, and she's been doing this openly for about 3 or 4 years. What she's demanding now is an elimination of the population of the world, to rapidly reduce it now from 7 billion people, which it had been just earlier, into less than 1 billion people. Now, the population of India is over than 1 billion people. The population of China is more than 1 billion people, and so on and so forth. And these guys are now shooting now, this year, this fall, The British and Wall Street, which is Wall Street is controlling the greatest part of the Congress, of the members of Congress. And these guys are out to destroy the United States, and they call themselves patriots? How can they be patriots if they're working with Wall Street? They're the enemies of the United States if they're working with Wall Street. And after this announcement by me, any senator, any member of Congress who's defending Wall Street is by me a declared enemy of the United States, a traitor to the United States. Because the intention is to reduce the population of the United States itself by, first of all, eliminating older people, eliminating the sick, cutting off health care, destroying the food supply, which you're already seeing. The food supply, what you can put on the table now in the United States is far poorer than anything close to what it was earlier, even just a couple of years ago, or a couple of terms ago. So we've come to the point, the same thing is true in Europe. Why is Europe suffering? Because of natural conditions or because of a misunderstanding? There is no misunderstanding, except on the part of the victims. The intention is to reduce the population of the planet from 7 billion people to less than 1. And the Queen of England and everybody involved with her has gone publicly with this repeatedly. There is no excuse for not knowing it. And the Wall Street is running on the basis of that. Everything that Wall Street is doing is aimed at that objective. And anybody who supports Wall Street by supporting Wall Street's cause in the Congress is a traitor to the United States. And I'm saying that now it's true. There's no doubt about it. Let them work that out. And he will understand exactly what I've said.
All right. Well, I'd like to ask you a question that I believe is going to be increasingly on a number of people's minds with the first anniversary of the Benghazi attack, 9/11/2012, and then the 12-year anniversary of the original attacks in New York and Washington, D.C. Now, one of the champions of getting a special committee convened to get the witnesses who were at the consulate on that day during the attack has been Frank Wolf, and he's gotten the majority of the House Republicans to sign on to his bill, and leading into the recess, he made statements on the floor of the House of Representatives every single day, raising questions about what took place during 9/11/2012. He recently, in the past few days, asked, what did the administration know? What did the White House know? What did John Brennan know, who was then Director of National Security? And he also put the spotlight on the issue of gun running, whether there was gun running taking place from Libya into Turkey and then into Syria, and whether that was being done on the basis of a presidential finding where Congress would not have to be informed. So there was a recent report just on August 1st. CNN reported on some revelations concerning how many Americans were actually in Benghazi at the time of the attack. It turns out it was upwards of 30 people. There were apparently 21 people at what was called what was known as the CIA annex later. So that's new. And now Wolf was asked during this program whether he believed that there was a cover-up taking place, and he responded in the affirmative. It would, through all appearances, yes, there's a cover-up taking place. And he said that the people who were there, these numbers of people, should come in. They should testify under oath. We should subpoena them. There's no national security issue with that. And largely, there were a number of these individuals who were approaching the congressman, and essentially begging to be subpoenaed because they knew what happened. But all of a sudden, they just shut up. And apparently, there was a gag order placed on these individuals. In some cases where normally people in this position would be getting a polygraph test every 4 years, they were getting polygraph tested every month. And this was done as sheer intimidation. It was done to ensure that none of these individuals were speaking to members of the Congress or members of the press. So I would, so with this brewing, and what was also reported is that these individuals, including Wolf, want to know about the weapons in Libya and what happened to them. And the issue with Syria is boiling over. Congress is not in session. The war danger is really increasing. So if you could address this issue, the 9/11 issue, that would be appreciated.
Well, we're on the edge of thermonuclear war. Now, that doesn't mean it's coming automatically, but it means that the way that things really happen in history is not because somebody simply planned something. It's because the mechanisms of government, in particular, and other things in society, move developments in a direction which makes them seem inevitable. It's like the famous so-called Guns of August syndrome. Right? No one intended to get into that particular war, they thought, except the British and the Dutch. But they got into it, and they just thought they were fighting a war. They were being patriotic, they were fighting a war. The other guys challenging them, and so forth. But they got the Guns of August, and you had this destruction of Europe in favor of the British and Dutch powers. And Europe has never recovered from the effects of that. Then we got into a Second World War. And it came about the same way. The only difference was that Franklin Roosevelt was alive. If Frank Roosevelt had not been president, who knows what the hell would have happened to the United States and so forth then. But Franklin Roosevelt prevented that by his leadership and by some general officers and so forth who were very good, knew what they were doing. And the same thing that was happening on the Korea question. You had the most able general functioning in the war period was actually bounced out of office because he was successful. You know, the killing of the Kennedy brothers, one after the other. Same thing. So you're dealing with that kind of reality. And what's happened now, because of the march of events, we're now headed toward actually thermonuclear war. And thermonuclear war is a kind of war which will settle the world within an hour and a half. You just have to look at the Asian fleet, the Pacific fleet, and that alone tells you what the story is. That's what Dempsey's been fighting against, and others. Now, as long as this foul ball, misnamed a president, remains in office, he's not really that important. He is not running the United States. The British and a crowd of people in the United States are running Obama. So he's not the target you want to hit at, which some foolish people will tend to do. And somebody may help encourage them to do that, just to make the blood bloodier. So therefore, the issue is not Obama. Obama's an issue because he's a factor. He's a used factor. He's not really human in every sense as a factor. He's a used factor, controlled by the British monarchy entirely. But behind him and around him, there's a surrounding of thugs who are built up since, well, essentially since the Bush family came back into power. George H.W. Bush was the cause of the disaster. He was the cause of the disaster when he was vice president. He was also a contributing factor of disaster before he became vice president for the first time. Yeah? It was done by his father, the man who put Hitler into power. So you have the Bush family, and the Bush family is also guilty of something else. The Bush family was the family that was organized from around Texas in particular to organize 9/11, which was a Saudi-British operation. I know that. 9/11 was done by the British Empire through the BOE also and the Saudi Kingdom. They did it. It was Saudi personnel in particular who flew the planes. The thing was set up entirely by that. Now, that's the problem we've got. We've got a problem inside the United States. We've got the worst kind of treason possibly. It's running loose. And they're using Obama as the exploited freak, actually, the exploited freak who is the nominal president. But he does not actually make the policy of the United States. He's a jerk, a freak. And so, therefore, the problem is you've got to get the United States in general to say, we will no longer be cowardly swine. We will be patriots once again. Now, what is happening is with the Snowden case is typical of this. What has happened, there's a kind of process going on inside the process. It goes into various places. Now, you've got China is threatened directly. And China is not an insignificant country, nor is India, who's a smaller country and less significant in terms of strategic operations. There are too many British influences in India to be as tough as the Chinese are, and so forth. So we are now in a situation where there are forces which are going to have to do something to prevent what is now marching toward the direction of thermonuclear war. And if a thermonuclear war is planned, a thermonuclear attack combined on Russia and China even alone, the opposing force is such, and the capabilities are such, that this thing will almost inevitably go to a thermonuclear war. And if it does, in an hour and a half, it could be the case that peace will come to the planet because no human being will be alive.
At this point in the broadcast, I would like to ask a few members of the LaRouche PAC Policy Committee to join in the participation. Initially, maybe I think Michael Steger, who is in here from California, can come to the podium and pose a question.
Thank you. So, Lynn, as you know, we've been here for the last 3 weeks, and there was a sense, obviously, of the importance at this point that we have a Congress which begins to respond to the needs and the crisis of the American people. Even over the course of the 3 weeks since we've arrived in town, and even as you've said, maybe that was perhaps a bit late, there has been a number of reports of collapsing life expectancy of the American people. There has been reports of increasing levels of poverty of even 80% of the American population over the course of the last 7 years and over the course of their lifetime. And so there was a sense of bringing that sense of the corners of our country to bear into Washington, D.C. And there was a sense that we must escalate the sense in Congress that Glass-Steagall is simply not words that must be implemented or legislation that's passed, but that it must become a fuller sense of legislation and of, as you said in a recent webcast, a sense of leadership in the country, because at this point we have no presidency, we have no executive branch, and that there must be from Congress, not based on partisan lines by any means, but based on a sense of principle, a sense of leadership. Now that came to fruition and came to bear over the course of the last week, but it required a specific intervention on your part, beginning Monday and with a certain sharpness on Tuesday. You might say we've been taken to the woodshed, or at least there was a call to attention by a commanding officer that a certain conception was not yet fully there. It was the bankruptcy of Wall Street in content, but in substance, there was something even more significant. Because the role of Congress and the role of leadership of our organization, of the policy committee and of yourself, and specifically your role in history, has been to bring to bear a sense of civilization into the process that we face today that is of historic nature, of a revolutionary quality in terms of this current crisis. And I'd like to bring that for you to address that question, but in a certain way, because I think it's directly related, as I was able to participate in what you raised over these last 3 weeks, and specifically Monday and Tuesday, was a very living idea of the role of the classical chorus. That really was the fundamental conception missing, an outlook that prevented us from really addressing the problems in Congress today on this question of bankrupting Wall Street and the full development of a Glass-Steagall policy. So if you could address that.
Well, my actions, which were especially those of Tuesday, because I was not satisfied with the response I was getting on Monday and before, that, you know, in real politics and strategy, there's a time for action and to different kinds of action. And therefore, you do not go to certain kinds of action at a certain time unless it's the thing that can be done. It doesn't have to be an assured victory, but it's a point where you would not shuck your responsibility to act. Now, on Monday, we had an action of that type, discussion, and the action did not materialize on Tuesday. So on Tuesday evening, naturally, I reacted because the time for action had come, and therefore I would do on that occasion what I would never do otherwise, because I'm not a fool. I'm willing to take my obligations and take my opportunities when they're there. But I'm not a fool who's going to just blindly plunge into something like a maniac. I'm an old man, and I'm serious, and I've had a lot of experience, not so much in warfare, but around warfare, over the decades now. And I know what these things are. I was, the author of the SAI, and this was a very important operation. We got defeated, but it was a thing to do at that time. We were right, and those who opposed me were wrong. And those who opposed me on this issue were the fools that destroyed this United States and made the situation virtually hopeless. So I only act under those circumstances because I'm not a fool. And many people are fools. They're well-meaning fools who plunge into anything at any time. But the purpose of struggle and conflict is to win. And you will fight like the devil to figure out how to win. But if you can't win, you're not going to create a bloody mess, which is something which needs to be taught to some of our military these days. You don't make a bloody mess. You win. And you figure out how to win. And you don't fight unless you've figured out how to win. Even if you don't know how to win, you know how to probably give some time for somebody else to come in and do the job. And that's what the situation is. We're in a point where we got a bunch of stinking cowards in the Congress. Why? They're trained to be stinking cowards. They're told. It's called, go along to get along. That's what the slogan is. And that's been in the Senate, for example, for a long time. Go along to get along. The sonorous nonsense of the Senate. That's why it's called Senate. Because they don't always think very clearly. In that case, no, they're opportunists. Many of our members of Congress are, or at least act as, nothing but plain, swindling opportunists. They fake, they lie, they deny, so forth. Everything that is repulsive about a human being you will find represented in the Congress. Not by all of the members of Congress, but all too many. Because they're advised on how to behave. When they go into the House of Representatives, they're advised. When they're about to be elected to some office for the new time, they're advised. Go along to get along. And that's what happens. You get a bunch. What you're looking at, what I'm looking at constantly, is the equivalent of a pack of cowards, stinking cowards, gutless wonders. And what you've got in Wall Street, you've got gutless wonders forming themselves into a lynch mob against humanity, which is Wall Street. Now, anybody who's a real patriot hates Wall Street and will do everything possible to cause its destruction. And that's what the time has come for. And anyone who's defending Wall Street, anyone who's defending that policy, in any form or other, is a stinking pig and should be described as such. At least they'll have some kind of character.
Next, I would like to ask Dave Christie to come to the podium. Dave Christie is from Washington State.
Okay, thank you. So, Lynn, I would like to ask the question on intention, which every meeting that we had on the Hill, every interaction we had on the Hill, immediately got to the question of intention, which for many of them, they didn't seem to think that there was such a thing that existed, such a thing that claims that we would make in terms of what the intention of Wall Street is. They would say, well, how would you know this intention, right? And I tell you, your intervention that you made in making it clear what our intention is with Glass-Steagall, as that our intention is to bankrupt Wall Street as the needed first step towards anything good that could possibly come. And that blew up many a meeting in a very fun way. And you actually would find out where people really stood. There was a number of offices who, these are actually congressmen who are, signers onto the bill. When we would say our intention is to bankrupt Wall Street, they would actually say, well, that's not our intention. Our intention is to clean up the banking system. Our intention is to make the markets more fair. Others who would say, oh yes, we on the Financial Services Committee, we know that's your intention, and that's why we're not going to let Glass-Steagall through. So I guess, what I'm getting at is that there's a way that, or even people that are for Glass-Steagall will often say, yes, we're for Glass-Steagall because we want better markets, which even the markets themselves is some idea that there's no intention, there's just people's random desires and so forth, and then this is how the society functions and so on. Versus, I think what you're getting at with Hamilton is an intention for the future. And so I guess I have my own ideas on it, but I'd just like to hear you clarify, what is it that people, it's almost that they're brainwashed on the idea that there could even be intention, that the world just revolves around mathematical formulas and, we're just sort of subject to those mysterious forces. But I guess it's a question of passion and the attack on it for civilization. So I don't know what you have to say on that. But
okay. Well, where does the passion come from to do both? You have to fight two things. You have to fight, and you have to fight intelligently, not like a fool. Now, the problem is elementary. Most people, including members of Congress, are not really patriots. They would not wish to do anything in the main which would be treasonous, according to their estimation. But they are primarily opportunists, butt kissers. That's the way you get ahead. You go from the start by going into the rear end, and that's the way this thing goes. So what you have is some very poorly educated and very opportunist people in the Congress. They're not bad people inherently, though there are a number of them who are real swine that I know personally to be the case. But the fact that they're not really very patriotic. They wouldn't like to be called unpatriotic, but when you judge patriotism by action, appropriate action, they ain't there. Very few of them. We've had a few who are actually seriously campaigning to get some things done, like this business, still in Libya. So that, but they really don't have it pulled together, shall we say. And therefore they're divided in terms of where they've got to be practical with their colleagues. They've got to find a way to walk through the thing and solve the problems, to try to convince the guys who've already been bought and sold. And when you've got a colleague who's bought and sold already, it's very difficult to really get anything good done with that colleague, unless you can really do what kicking the butt means. You have to come in with a very massive boot, loaded with lead, if that's probably, and give them an uplifting experience which can be executed with the proper application of a heavy boot. Then you might get some patriotism out of them. But right now, what they're concerned about is scheming against their rivals, scheming against the guy who's going to take their position away from them, or scheming against the guy they intend to strip of his position. They're selling each other out. A bunch of crooked, corrupt people who have no moral concerns. They may have them somewhere, but they carefully bury them for the most part. They won't let their opportunities be impeded by their corruption. And that's the kind of thing you get. So the only way you can deal with these guys is you can, in one sense or another, scare the pants off them, but that's not a good thing to look forward to. But nonetheless, that's it. Only when they get to the point, oh yes, I agree, that's when you get some action from them. And if you haven't scared the pants off them and disgusted the ladies present, then you're not going to get much. But the point is you have to come in and you have to, like some people did in the military. You got into a unit that doesn't work, it doesn't function, it's sloppy, it's all over the place, and you do what's called kicking ass. You move in, not to brutalize people, but to shake them up, but good. And that's what has to be done. You will not get anything out of this Congress that's worthwhile unless you're willing to shake much of the Congress up very, very good.
At this point, I would like to ask Rachel Brown to come to the podium. Rachel is here from Massachusetts.
Hi, Lynn. I'd like to identify a bit of what I think other policy members have been discussing with the shadows that we've been interacting with in Washington, D.C., and to identify what is the root of those shadows. But I think you put that point in your recent paper on the subject of oligarchy, where you address the difference between the oligarchical principle and what you call with Hamilton the goodness of the anti-monetarist principle. But I think what we're seeing is definitely just an expression of the Roman British policy of empire and monetarism as the current expression of that in a very, very ugly form. But I just want to read a quote from part of that paper where you say, "To be clear, evil is commonly expressed as the alienation of value, as away from the authority of that vital U.S. interest, which is represented by a proper consideration of the social economic effects on the whole population of the nation." So I think that gives a certain outline for what we need to discuss instead of monetarism. So I thought you could address that.
Yeah, sure. What the essential thing you're looking for, and it has two aspects. There are honest people who maybe seem timid, and they may be sitting back there thinking, somebody's got to do something about this. Somebody's got to do something about this. Or why don't they do this? Or why don't they do that? And then the butt-kicking aspect of the thing means to get the guy who is really impeding that discussion and kick his butt in one way or another, to get him to shut up so the people who are really thinking seriously will get a chance to discuss. And often they are not aggressive people. They're simply people who are reflecting, and in their chair where they're sitting in the evening or something, will just simply say, you know, this is wrong. And then they will say, I think we've got to do something about it. They don't go in bellowing as such. They may get very angry after frustration again and again. But that's the point. What you really have to do, your job when you're in that kind of situation, you have to take the responsibility for protecting the people who are not bold actors, but who have a very serious understanding of what they're about and need some backup. You have to provide the leadership, the quality of leadership, which they interpret as the protection of their right to express what they think. And that's the problem in the Congress today. We have all these gutless wonders and these terrorists, and then you have the people of the Congress who would like to be honest, would wish to be honest, would wish to be patriotic. Huh? And you have to back them up. And when I kick butt, which I do sometimes, is for precisely that reason. Because if you don't, then all the people who are not big fighters, but just thinkers, and they're thinking about what's just, they may not have the right answer, but they would like to discover what the right answer is. So you're not always looking for people who have all the answers. You're looking for people who are open-minded and constructive in trying to find out what the answer is, and talking with other people about trying to say, what is the answer? What's your take on this? And that's what's lacking, and that's the problem you have to maintain. And the problem is also a legend. The behavior of people in American politics today is based on the assumption that the big bullier is the boss. And that goes with the kind of clown shows that we're used to in the Congress. When the average person, like Alexander Hamilton at his desk, is working to produce the most powerful conceptions that mankind had ever known, which is what he did. This man was a genius with an intellectual power beyond belief, and a personal courage at the same time. But he was not a blusterer. He was not a bull artist. And it's those kinds of people who really produce the opportunity and actually educate and stimulate other people who are similarly disposed, not to make a big bluster or hullabaloo, but to actually, on the basis of careful consideration, fighting out the issues step by step, try to think this thing through. What's right, what's wrong, what's wrong. And you want a real citizen who is thinking, not stinking.
So I'd like to ask the final question of the night, and it comes in from a member of a state legislature who has been deeply involved in the Glass-Steagall work. And I'll just mention that all of the individuals who have been working in these state houses do have the opportunity coming up in September at the National Conference of State Legislators to pool together, even at that late date, to make sure that we get Glass-Steagall. And throughout the coming month, when Congress is out of session, they're going to be at home in your district waiting to hear from you and receive the uplifting experience so described by Mr. LaRouche. So this question comes in from a state legislator. She asks, Mr. LaRouche, in the course of my efforts to build support for the reenactment of Glass-Steagall, I have encountered various forms of partisan politicking that has horrified me. While I've been a lifelong Republican, my original association with the Republican Party, grew out of my deep and abiding respect for Abraham Lincoln, the true father of the party. I always admired what Lincoln did to keep the Union together, and in particular, I've always been impressed with his policy for Reconstruction and his insistence that the Reconstruction work proceed with malice toward none and charity for all. Lincoln was the strongest of leaders, a true Republican in the best sense, but never mindlessly partisan and always oriented toward the preservation of the Union through its further economic, industrial, and scientific development. It is my understanding that FDR, the person who is arguably the father of the modern Democratic Party, was a great admirer of Abraham Lincoln, and that Lincoln's economic thinking informed much of Franklin Roosevelt's thinking. Could you address the means by which we can best overcome the kinds of petty partisanship, the squabbles that threaten to prevent the reenactment of Glass-Steagall today? How best do we revive the great spirits of both Lincoln and FDR in this time of crisis?
What you run into in politics is the dirty word called opportunity, or what they call politics. There is no particular principle of interest of the nation involved. This is what I'm dealing with even in our own effort, because people say, let's be practical. And my view is if a person is practical, I don't want them to open their mouths, because they're simply the kind of people who will try to dissimulate and change the subject in order to prevent any decision from being made, any real decision from being made. Go along with the crowd. See who you're going to be lined up. Where's your opportunity? How many people are going to support you? This kind of thing. You're not judging the issue on its merits. And this is, you might say, the minds of many of our politicians, members of Congress included. The minds aren't there. They're not really there. The money is. And therefore they say, be practical, get ahead. Now, what do congressmen today do? You know what they do. As they get into office, they grab as much money as they can from outside, largely from outside, on the basis of their influence in what they think is their influence in the Congress. But actually, what is happening is that group is influencing them. They're trying to influence the Congress. They need money to influence the Congress. What's happening, they're being bought and sold. And this is what the real problem is. And the only way you can deal with that is by getting away from the reliance on monetary issues, monetarist issues as such. You have to have project orientation, which is what has always saved us. The nation says, well, you have a large project, a great project like the great dams and things of that side. Now we've got NWAPA. Without NWAPA, on a new form, different than that back in the middle of the 1960s, because we come out with new technologies. We now have the ability of thermonuclear power and thermonuclear power. And with thermonuclear and nuclear power, we can do miracles relative to anything anybody conceived of in the original NWAPA program. We can use nuclear and thermonuclear power to augment the potential of that whole system. We can, with that method, we can save the dying nation, at least it's in this area in the middle of the nation, along the Mississippi and Missouri and so forth, where the water levels are so low that you can't maintain cattle or even grow crops often now. So therefore, with this use of nuclear thermonuclear power applied to the design for NWAPA, that was the water system, we can do, as people in this room know who are specializing in this thing, we can do miracles that otherwise are impossible. We'll have to shut down the greenies, because the greenies are actually destroying the economy. They're destroying the productivity of people per capita. They're destroying the great areas which have been destroyed already and preventing us from recreating and redeveloping areas that are no longer flourishing. So we can do that. And that's the mission, is to mobilize people around an understanding of, look at the whole nation. Look at the whole nation in the terms of the world as a large. What should we be doing? Not from this little point here and this little point here, but what are we doing in the large? What did Franklin Roosevelt do? He did it in the large. What did Lincoln do? In the large. What did John Quincy Adams do? In the large. What did Monroe do? In the large. What did, so forth, and so on. Always in the large. You have to think about the nation and the world. We are human beings. We have a limited lifespan. But the difference is between just being a thing with a living lifespan, what you are, you become a person of significance because you are participating in a positive way in bringing into being things of benefit to humanity which otherwise would be impossible without a concerted action of that type. That's what Roosevelt did. Concerted action for the effect, the necessary effect. And it worked. Similar things have worked. It's the nature of our system. We can produce miracles if we simply understand that principle. Big things that are necessary. And increasing the power which mankind per capita can wield to make life of human beings feasible. And we also have another agenda. You know, it's said that the solar system, that the sun will be self-destroyed by 2 million years from now. Now, 2 million years is a fairly long time. When you think in galactic terms, they're not very long at all. It's rather quick. And since it takes a long time, step by step, to build up certain capabilities which are necessary for mankind, you have a limit on time. You cannot just do anything on any given day. You have to build up step by step by step. And then you can take the most challenging thing can be mastered if you have the time and determination to go step by step in that direction. And that's what we have to do. We have to think of rebuilding the United States. We have to think in this term, not the so-called usual political term. Great projects which are each have their limitations, but each, as progress, leads to new kinds of progress, and so on and so on. Look at the history of the United States. Look, we are in a period, a new century, which started recently, 2013. And we have 4 generations with which to feed and nourish to get through this century successfully. And that means that by 4 generations, it means people, when they reach about the age of 25, they should have gone through a maturation process, which means that from that point on, they should be moving ahead up until the time their age overtakes them. So you have 4 generations per century. What you have to do is you have to think of assigning a mission orientation to each of the 4 generations. And increase the productive powers of labor. 4 great leaps in a single century. Now you look back at the history of the United States, look back at the initial settlement in the Massachusetts Bay Colony, and that's how it works. The point is to always increase the productivity, the intellectual capability of the members of society. And you can find in this principle, 100 years, I'm getting there, I'm 90 odd years now. But when you live a quarter century, then you get a sense of what this means. And therefore the process is each generation must march to progress for all humanity. And each generation must be succeeded by another generation which takes it a higher level. Like NWAPA was possible back in the time of Kennedy. Now we have a more powerful system is available to us now. March step by step, each generation, progress, progress, progress. And rejoice in the progress. Rejoice in the memory of what was done to bring progress about. And rejoice at the prospect of attacking the new generation's talent challenge now. And it's from that attitude, inbred into our citizens, especially our political leaders, that the greatness of our nation can be restored.
Thank you, Lynn. That is the conclusion to our webcast tonight. I'd like to thank Leandra for joining me in the studio, and I would like to especially thank the Policy Committee for the questions they asked tonight and for everything that they have done over the recent period while they've been in this region of the country. So thank you for watching. You've been watching the live webcast that happens every Friday night with Mr. LaRouche, and this brings a conclusion to our broadcast now. Good night.